Welcome to the Human Nexus podcast. My name is Miss Laura Machiste. I am an online tarot reader, massage therapist, spiritual coach.
And my name is Andrew Brazis. I am a business and marketing consultant and a private chef. And the hopes for this podcast is to connect people through human experience and learning more about the unknown and kind of diving into the more esoteric or taboo things in consciousness, um, getting into spirituality, astrology, religion, anything else you want to add?
Definitely all of that stuff. I feel like on the spiritual journey, there isn't much of understanding other people's human experiences and just going with trying to figure out your own. So I feel like this podcast is really going to help bridge that connection between our human experiences, make people feel less alone on their journey, as well as also what they go through and how it's connected to tarot and what I do, astrology, even just like mediumship energy, signs, synchronicities, numerology, angel numbers, all of that stuff where it is more or less seemed as taboo, but there is actual literal facts that these things are connected. So this is exactly why we are here making this podcast.
Yeah, and then going through, I believe we're going to be sharing a lot about our experience probably in the initial couple of episodes,
Right.
um, and how hopefully it relates to people going through the same stuff.
Exactly. And when I read tarot online, I'm constantly throwing in my stories or teachings or what I feel about the energy. And a lot of the times you'd have to go on and watch the reading to know what story I had to say or what teaching or what download I got. So I feel like this is going to be a really good platform to give those stories and experiences and things that happen without needing my community to always watch a reading. So I feel like this is really good for that expansion and also getting people together in that similar human experience to where sometimes on the spiritual journey it could feel really lonely or you feel like you don't know what's going on or it just feels really weird. And I feel like having this is something that is going to make not only me feel more comfortable in expressing, but also hope for other people to feel more comfortable in expressing your stories and feeling not so weird, but just aligned and connected.
Yeah, that's the goal. I have some really probably outlandish views on just like the purpose of life. Without getting too much into my past in this episode, I deconstructed when I was very, very young. Uh, it
How
was,
old?
I want to say it was seventh grade. So I don't know, like 12, 13. I
Okay.
was very involved in the church. And in seventh grade, we basically it was advanced language or English. And we were
Mm,
allowed to choose a topic. And I picked God's existence. And this was like the early 2000s. So I had the
mhm.
raw internet to work with before they had all the, gates and stops up and everything. And I
Right.
learned about God's existence and all the other religions, which I wasn't exposed to at the time because I come from a
Hmm.
very small rural Indiana town. And that just completely blew my mind. Like I was learning about Buddhism and Hinduism and atheism. Alien. I mean, this was like deep, deep internet in the early 2000s. So, I mean, if you can imagine the stuff that
Right.
came up. So I wrote the paper and presented it. And then from that day forward, I was no longer a Christian.
Wow.
Um, and it wasn't like an immediate occurrence, but I knew from
Mhm.
that point on, like Christianity just wasn't where I fit in. But I didn't have a support system in that.
Right.
So I've kind of created my own purpose or view of life and getting into astrology. Um, this is kind of a big jump, but to me, if there is some sort of grand creator,
Right.
which I'm not sure if I believe in or not. I mean, that's pretty open-ended for me still.
Hmm.
Um, if there is, they would have some sort of algorithm or to go off of to set humanity up for. And to me, I believe if that's the case, then that is astrology. Like when you're born into the world at this time in this place, that is like your starting point.
Right.
And so I've used astrology for quite a while to kind of navigate my life day to day,
Mm-hmm.
even like big life events. And then and we'll get when we've gotten into this off camera
Yeah.
some, but
Mm-hmm.
going back in time to where really significant events in my life has happened over, I don't know, 6, 7 years, and then seeing those cycles replay in the same way are just really strange. And
Right.
so, um, go ahead.
That was actually one of the things that when I first started the spiritual journey, I didn't really know what was happening the whole
Mm,
time. I just knew I grew up and everything was weird. I knew things were going to happen or had dreams things were going to happen. And bringing up astrology, and I grew up Catholic, but I was just coloring whatever they had me color. I wasn't really like paying attention. Um, and went through everything. I did communion, I got confirmed, all of that stuff, got my cross necklaces and all of that. And at one point in my life, before I even got into tarot and any of that stuff, I wondered, I'm like, well, what are the planets here for? Like, why are they there?
mm, yeah,
They're just there for nothing. There's no way. If every type of existence has a meaning, then what is the meaning of the planets? If they are surrounding us and following us through this galaxy, then how could they not affect us? It that didn't make sense to me.
right.
And I have the same type of thing, like if there's a grand creator or multiple of them or whatever the case may be, they're there for a reason. Jupiter was not placed as a huge gas giant in the sky for it not to affect something. There's no way it doesn't affect something. So that is where it got me into astrology, and I started looking into zodiac signs and all of this stuff. And that's actually what got me into looking into the sun, moon, and rising. Because all my life, everyone's like, oh, you must be a Leo or you must be a fire sign. And I was always like, no, I'm born in March. I'm a Pisces. And I would look up what they would say about Piscean people. And I'm like, yeah, the weird psychic stuff makes sense, but the personality trait doesn't. And knowing that the moon was in Leo when I was born and my ascendant is Aries, and it just made so much more sense to my personality and who I was. And that kind of changed a lot of things for me too, where I was like, if I'm connecting it personally, then I'm sure a bunch of other people are like, wait a minute,
Yeah,
how is this possible?
yeah. And if you get into astrology or like just the moon and like how it affects not just the planet, but
Right.
like hospitals on full moons are
Mm-hmm.
crazy. I mean, you could go
Right.
for days on that kind of stuff. It's really
Yep.
hard to deny, I think,
Mm-hmm.
just for an experience standpoint.
That's why it's called a lunatic.
Oh
When a full
shit.
moon's out, the crazies are out.
Yeah,
Lunatic, Luna,
yeah,
moon. Yeah.
that's wild.
Yeah. So the lunatics are out when the full moon happens, and that's like an ancient type of thing that they put with the word Luna.
Yes. Speaking of the moon, um, how do you like what do you do in a daily practice for spirituality? Like, do you have anything that you consistently do?
Um, so I feel like because I'm a tarot reader, I'm kind of like in the
Mm,
spiritual vibes constantly. I feel like every time I wake up and go to sleep, I'm in spiritual practice. So I feel like in terms of paying attention to cycles, I definitely pay attention to new moons and full moons. Um, and that was another thing too that I feel like basic astrology made you feel like new moons bring in new things, full moons remove things. But if the law of duality is true, then both should do both. New
yeah.
should bring in a closure, full
Mhm.
should bring in something new. Because if something ends, then there has to be a birth of something new. So I definitely go along with the new moon and full moons. I'll do my little um, written manifestations. I used to light a lot of candles with herbs and oils and stuff like that, but I haven't done that as much. I definitely do writing. I talk to myself all the time, so I'm constantly affirming to myself out loud inside. So, and I'm always very aware. So I feel like spiritually, every day I'm constantly working on my awareness, working on like, what am I missing? What is this trying to tell me? So I kind of feel like I practice it very consciously and subconsciously now. But in the beginning, it was like, all right, the new moon's happening. Let me write my affirmation. It was more like I had to get on schedule. And now it's kind of more of like a way of living.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
How do
I
you do it in your life?
Yeah, I would say I'm very in tune with the new moon, full moon.
Hmm.
I believe we kind of talked about this, but
Yeah.
uh, I want to say it was 2 years ago ish. I started doing full moon and new moon rituals, and I haven't missed
Hmm.
one since. And so that's been really just eye-opening and seeing kind of like what's coming in and what's going out, even like not even as a spiritual aspect, but just like a checks and balances for me, like mentally.
Right.
Like, where are my goals at? Am I like releasing the things that I said I would release, or like the habits that I was going to let go of in the last couple of weeks?
Hmm.
Um, and so that's been just really good on like accountability side. But then like spiritually, it's been really interesting to see my life transform. Like when I started doing it, I was at a pretty big low. And then a
Hmm.
year later, I went through like the most traumatic experience, like 3 months in my life.
Right.
And that experience, I mean, it was unavoidable. And I don't want to say I like manifested it like and brought it in, but
Hmm.
I think that it was extremely transformative. And had I not been doing the moon work, I wouldn't have been in a place
Hmm.
mentally or emotionally to get through it, which
Right.
is weird. So, in like in a weird sense, I mean, I was also like doing therapy, in conjunction with those things. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, it was just really weird how it all played out. And then outside of that, I try to meditate daily. I don't always, but I mean, multiple times a week for sure. Um, like journaling intently has been kind of like
Yeah.
a meditative experience. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to
Do
think
you
of
ever
like,
do dancing meditation? That's what I do.
I do not. I've just recently within this year got into like somatic movement.
Uh
So
huh.
like, yes, but I've not been physically embodied
Oh,
ever
put
in
on
my
a
life.
good song and start
Yeah.
dancing
Yeah,
because the
I'm moving in that
downloads
direction.
will be amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And you'll be in more connection to your body. So if you bring up meditation,
Mhm.
that's what I do. I don't sit there.
Yeah.
Sometimes like if I find like a video where it's walking me through the meditation, I'll
Hmm.
lay down and listen to it, but just straight up silence, not so much.
Yeah.
But I'll do dancing meditation and it works greatly.
Interesting.
Try that.
Yeah. I'll have to try that.
How do you get yourself in that meditative mode for people that maybe can't silence their mind and do maybe certain things like I do, like dance?
Yeah. For me, it starts with breath. But again,
Mm,
like when I deconstructed as a child, I started meditating.
right.
And so,
Wow. As a child.
yeah, um, like there was a stint early when I like was learning how to meditate. And I
Hmm.
don't know how long I mean, I think it was like 4 to 5 years. In that process, when you have like one or two experiences that were like heightened experiences, like outer
Right.
body experiences, or like seeing I call it the white light. I don't know how else to
Mm,
explain it, but you just kind of like transcend in this weird way.
right.
um Getting to that point, like doing it a couple of times in that time frame, that 3 to 5 year time frame, I would get so frustrated when I couldn't just sit down and do it. And then now, like since I've been doing it so long,
Hmm.
it's like I can sit down, focus my breath for 3 to 5 seconds, and then I'm gone, like I'm there. So
Wow.
the only thing that I could say for people to try is just practice, like do it a lot. And again, breath work has been my saving grace. I don't know,
Mhm.
it's anti-movement for me.
Right.
like staying extremely still, um, noise canceling headphones,
Hmm.
um, and almost, I mean, not always, but having like no sound is like utter silence. I know that creeps some people
Hmm.
out, but for me, it's just like the best place. And then also like doing it outdoors, like if you have a yard that you can
Oh
like get
yeah.
into nature, that's super helpful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's good because I feel like a lot of the times when meditation is brought up, certain people are like, well, I don't know how to quiet my mind and that's it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why it's also nice where I meditate in a different way.
Mhm.
I know how to quiet my mind, but there just isn't that the stillness for me is just too still for some reason.
Yeah.
Um, but as someone who has a lot of like meditative dreams and gets a lot of like premonitions and downloads through dreams, I kind of just feel like when I go to bed, I'm sure they'll give me what they have for me. And as I meditate through dance and movement, it's kind of like I'll put on a song and I'll play the song for like 10 times over and over and over and over. And then on like the seventh time, I'll have a new idea or I'll think about something. And I'm like, oh, right, let me do that or write that down. And it's just really interesting that people do things in different ways. And that's kind of another intention with this podcast as well, is that just because you may do things different doesn't mean you're not spiritual. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your journey compared to other people's journeys, is that there's just different ways to do things. And on breath work, I did do a 90 breath work journey that was still, but they have you breathe in a way where you do bring yourself to your edge
Yeah.
to show your body that you have control and
Mhm.
you can bring yourself back. Oh my gosh, I almost had a panic attack. I'm like, it's working. Backpedal, backpedal. So 90 breath work was definitely an experience for me as someone who doesn't meditate stillness and quietly. Um, and it
And
definitely brought a lot of cool
did you
things.
do that through like a program, like an event? Like,
Yes, I went to an event.
yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. And they gave you like headphones. They had like the 90 journey going through. They did like a nice little ritual. We like burned what we wanted to release. I did the letting go one and I did the awakening one. And the awakening one was the second one I did. So, just how you say practice is very helpful in
Yeah.
spirituality and everything, really, specifically in meditating of what we were saying. But when I first did the breath work, I don't think I was doing it right. I just was
Mhm.
breathing normally. And then when I finally understood for the second time and I got myself to the edge, I was like, oh my gosh, someone's got to reel me back in. And that was definitely the experience of like, okay, I get it. I understand. And from that moment on, I did the breath work on the Lionsgate portal at night. And the things that have been coming through since then have been crazy. So I definitely agree with that breath situation. So it's interesting. It ties hand in hand.
What about doing like spiritual things on like Lionsgate portal or new moon and full moon? Like I've had really wild experiences, like
Oh,
just like
yeah.
when the energy's heightened. And I think people kind of write that stuff off, or it gets thrown into
Hmm.
like a different bag, I guess.
Right. The coincidence bag.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That everything is a coincidence bag
Mhm.
is what I like to call it because everyone wants to say everything is a coincidence, but that's actually some things that I teach people with like new moons, full moons, Lionsgate portal, things like that to be observant. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
you may see an angel number, but what words are around that angel number? You're seeing this license plate that's got 5 8s on it. What's the car? Is it a
yeah,
Ford Edge? Is it um a Dodge Charger? Like, what is it? Like, look for the symbolism in the symbolism. So like on new moons, full moons, Lion Gates portal, I will specifically like look for the signs. I'm like, okay, what do you got to tell me? What do I need to know? In just being like surprised by the universe in a sense.
yeah, yeah. When did that start for you? Like, there was there, because for me, there was a
Mhm.
part in my journey where I was like, okay, either something's happening or I'm just
Mhm.
like reading into this way too much. Like, when did you trust your intuition? I guess is what I'm asking.
Um, with the knowledge of the spiritual journey or without the knowledge of the spiritual journey?
I would say both. Excuse
Okay,
me, if you
so
could.
without the knowledge of the spiritual journey, I knew something was weird because I kept having dreams that ended up happening to me. And I
Mhm.
was just like, okay, like this doesn't make sense. I had this dream 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks later, how is this occurring? And so I came to realize that they are very metaphoric. Like they're not always exactly the way things happen. But that's when I was like, okay, trust your intuition. You have some type of something. So give yourself that trust to see what my feelings are. And the dreams definitely got me onto like what's going on. This stuff is weird. But with the spiritual journey, I'm big on like proof and confirmation. So
Yeah.
I test the energy, I test the universe, like I do all of that stuff. I don't know if you ever heard of rando nodding.
Mhm.
It is an app that you put your intention into and it brings you to a point. They say to be safe or, like don't go places that you shouldn't go, this, that, and the other. Like if it says no trespassing and the point is in the trespassing area, don't go over there.
Yeah.
So this is when I was like still experimenting with the universe. And when my grandpa first passed away, like one of the ones that I remember from my family, I was doing DoorDash in between nannying
Hmm.
because I was bored waiting for them to be done. And we were in a very like more wealthy area. And I would look around for signs and I would put my rando knot on and give an intention. And one of the times I asked it to give me a sign for my grandpa, and his name was George. And they don't tell you where you're going, they just give you the point. They brought me to George Washington Cemetery.
Interesting. And
And then I was like, oh shit.
did you give them like the George information?
No, so you just download Randonaught, you
Mhm.
say attract attractor, you like mentally put your intention. That's why this was very like
Interesting.
experimental for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's really interesting.
I was like, what is going on
Mhm.
right now? Oh, and then once I saw that it was called George Washington and I wanted a sign from my grandpa, I was like, this is crazy. So I definitely experiment a lot and I have a bunch of stories with that, but a
Yeah,
lot of that
we can get
physical
into that.
proof. Yeah.
Yeah, like we'll have a whole episode of, because I have so many stories like that are like,
If you have a small story, you could put towards what I just said, like where you
yeah.
could give your
So
with and without.
I think I don't know if I have a with or without, but my biggest, I don't know, indicator. So I had uh, in the deconstructing phase, I kind of went through all the
Mhm.
religions, the major religions, and like spent some time studying and like maybe I'm Buddhist, maybe I'm Hindu, maybe I'm atheist.
Right.
And in the atheist phase, I used to sit outside my parents' home under a window and I would meditate there, and that was like where I would hang out in the evenings.
Hmm.
And one of those evenings, it was like storming outside, no rain, just a lot of thunder and lightning. And I sent like I had like a conversation with the sky, and it sounds really crazy, but it was. And in the moment, I was just like going with it, and I was like, "Damn, that probably was nothing." And when I went to bed, I was like, "Okay, if this was actually real, like just show me something, like just
Hmm.
anything that's out of the ordinary, like whatever." And that next day, I had a restaurant job, and I was leaving for work, and my car was covered with dragonflies. Like, I mean, it was like scary to walk up to because like
Wow.
I like the uh uh driver's side door, the windshield was like completely covered with dragonflies, and there wasn't any it like I've never seen a dragonfly in my backyard. Like it's not like a
Oh my gosh.
typical bug that's like hanging around. So this was really strange and
Right.
add like just out of the ordinary. And then so I got in my car, I drove, they stuck with me for like half a block and then they all like dispersed. And as I was doing research into this, like figuring out, okay, well, like what's the symbolism of dragonflies, and
Mm,
it's related to like spiritual awakening.
yeah.
And I was like,
Rebirth.
damn, yeah. I was like, okay. And for me, like that day was a really concrete of like event was like, okay, something is paying attention or like interacting with me in this way.
Yeah. And you asked the sky and they gave
Yeah.
you a
I had a
nature.
whole, I asked, I don't remember what they were, but it was a series of yes and no questions. And I
Hmm.
was responded to with like lightning flashes in a really like weird way. And again, like one of my, I'm a huge just skeptic of life in general.
Me too.
And so when these things happen, like it's fun in the moment, but
Mm,
like when I'm processing, I try to take out like whatever biases I think I have to the best of my ability, and then
right.
chalk things up to, okay, well, that was just me, grieving or whatever it was in the moment. And
Mm,
so, but then when you have a confirmation like I had, it's like, oh, okay. And then I mean, that's one instance, but that's happened different ways, time and time again. Like still, like even like we'll get into this also, but like starting this podcast and like how we met
right.
and like
Yeah.
how like all the crazy things that's rolled into
Hmm.
that. It's just like it's so hard once that happens to ignore it, especially
Right.
especially when it's kind of like when you're deconstructing your faith and like you see the other side. It's like you can't see things differently now. It's just like
Mm,
things have changed and you can't go
right.
back. Um, yeah. So
So do you feel like that could be challenging for you where, like you are someone like that from what you said, has gone to research a bunch of different religions.
mhm.
Did you find that they all had a commonality um, where, like I didn't do all the research, but when I read little spiels of all different religions, it looks like they all have a very common theme of
Yeah.
self and love.
Mhm.
Did you find that, or do you feel like others were a little different when you're in the face of people who are super religious? Like, how do you navigate that? Because I know spirituality, especially me as a tarot reader, when people ask me what I do, I feel like I'm screening them with my intuition to be like, are they spiritual? Are they not
Mm,
spiritual? Should
okay.
I tell this person? Should I not? So, as someone who's gone through all of these researching aspects of the different religions, like, what do you do when people are around you in that sense that doesn't resonate with what you know now?
I think in my like recent experience, I would say if people don't resonate, they're usually pretty vocal and like turned off immediately. So the
Right.
conversation doesn't like go beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like me personally, I don't believe there's a wrong answer. Like I think every answer is, I mean, this kind of goes back to the purpose of life question, but
Mm-hmm.
I think we actively create what it is that we believe in.
Right.
Um, so I don't like I don't really like not it's not judgment, but I don't see somebody as like not spiritual or spiritual. I think they're like at a different place in their life path.
Right.
And I think my experience was like I was like thrown into that for whatever reason. And
Mm-hmm.
I learned very early and like deconstructed very young. So I started the deconstructing process like 25 years ago versus
Right.
people who are just starting it now. So I think I have a lot of, I don't know, openness for,
Mm.
the different, I don't know, like where people are. I think too, like Christians specifically, just in my
Mm-hmm.
experience, there's a lot of like ego that gets stuck into like their identity is Christianity instead of like
Right.
practicing a spiritual practice
Mm-hmm.
as a Christian, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's like this thing that I saw online, and it's like Buddhists call it this, Christians call it prayer, spiritual people call it manifesting, but it all
Yeah.
is the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like you were raised Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
Catholicism practices, I mean, everything that they not everything, but what they practice is basically rituals,
Right.
which like outside of Christianity, if you're a Catholic, those are like bad or taboo
Mm-hmm.
rituals, but they're doing the same thing. It's just labeled differently.
Right.
But it's essentially just like a magic alchemical ritual or spiritual ritual.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
So yeah, I see a lot of the same across the board for sure.
So, like, for example, if someone said to you, like, I don't believe the moon does anything, you
Yeah.
just say, okay, and then move
Yeah.
on. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, why do you feel that way though?
Yeah.
What makes you feel like the moon doesn't do anything?
I
Okay. There's a
well
difference there. I'm like,
well
why?
also I've kind of given up on like I would much prefer to like plant a seed in the
Mm,
conversation than like try to convince them.
right, right,
Like
right.
in that example, I'd be like, yeah, maybe that's your perspective. Did you know that on full moons, hospitals have higher likelihood of baby deliveries?
Mm-hmm.
And if they go and Google it, like, oh wow, this is crazy. Like, oh,
Right.
and then just let them figure it out.
Uh-huh. I actually saw a video about somebody deciphering the stock market on new
Mm.
moons and full moons, and that like on full moons, or I don't know the exact, don't quote me on this, people, but there's something where it's on a full moon it's better, or on a new moon it's better than when it's full, vice versa, and that people who do stocks can see it.
Mhm.
And that's another thing as well, is that billionaires, millionaires, celebrities, all of these people, there might not be outwardly about it, but they all have an astrologer.
Yeah.
They all have someone looking into things. And that goes hand in hand with like you having that statistic with the hospital, as well as collectively you could see people being like, well, that's just weird. Why is the stock always better on a new moon, and then a full moon it's dropping, in whatever way they had that? So I definitely feel like more people are starting to see the connection without it being like right in front of their face.
Yeah. And I think too, like when it comes to spirituality, everything that I've done and like learned, I had to
Mhm.
learn on my own. Like there was nothing anybody
Right.
would tell me that I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. Like
Mhm.
and that kind of goes back to the podcast of like what we're trying to do is it's such like a lived experience
Mhm.
that if you don't experience it, like there's no convincing
Right, right.
in my opinion.
Which is exactly the intention for this, of the human nexus,
Yeah.
in reality of having that human connection. And what is the quote? Knowledge is the experience is the greatest teacher.
Yeah.
So that does make sense as to why like you have to go through it to learn from it, or go through it to understand it better.
All right. Moving forward into the future for the podcast, what topics are you thinking we want to cover?
So I can definitely talk about anything spiritual, but for sure, like astrology, tarot, things in alignment with dreams and weird experiences, signs, synchronicities, deconstructing religion in that sense, as well as like making sense of our experiences. Probably even talk about trauma and things that go hand in hand with spiritual evolution with traumatic experiences as well. But basically, just an overall human nexus connection of experiences through collective of all of us.
Yeah. And we will be having guests on in the future.
Yes. Yes.
So that's something. So for those watching, keep that in mind. There will be
Yes.
more. Um, episode 2, when it comes out, we're going to talk about how we got started, like kind of how all the synchronicities and just how this came about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll get into that and show more of like this type of experience that came between the two of us and making this podcast, as well as in the future, if there is any type of stories or any type of experiences that you're watching and you want to share, don't forget to subscribe so you don't lose this channel. And we'll look into more experiences in the future connected to basically everything spiritual and really bridge that gap between the woo woo aspect of spirituality to the no, this is really happening and how do you explain it?
Yeah, that's great.
So I'll see you next time.